Hello friends, welcome to IAS ABHIYAN YouTube channel. Today we will learn on the functions of ecosystem from Shankar IAS Environment. Important learnings from this chapter includes the energy flow, food chain, food web, what is ecological pyramids, bioaccumulation and biomagnification, biogeochemical cycles, and lastly ecological succession. As we all know that ecosystem is the structural and functional unit of biosphere consisting of community of living beings and the physical environment. More clearly, it is a chain of interaction between organisms and their environment. The functions of an ecosystem can be studied under three basic heads. The first one is the energy flow, second is nutrient cycle, that is the biogeochemical cycles, and lastly ecological succession, or we can say ecosystem development. So what is energy flow? Energy flow is the basic force responsible for all metabolic activities. It flows from producer to top consumers through the trophic levels. Energy flow never flows in the reverse directions. The trophic level interaction involves three concepts, namely food chain, food web, and ecological pyramids. So what is food chain? Basically, a food chain is a sequence of organisms that feed on one another, that starts with producers and ends with top carnivores. It is the sequence of eaten and being eaten which produces some transfer of food energy. Like plant converts solar energy into chemical energy by the process of photosynthesis. So food chain is basically a sequence of organisms that feed on one another. Next is the types of food chain. Food chain includes grazing food chain and detritus food chain. Grazing food chain, where the consumers will start the food chain utilizing the plant or plant part as their food. It begins from green plants at the base, and the primary consumer is the herbivore. The primary source of energy under grazing food chain is living plant biomass. Detritus food chain. Under the detritus food chain, the process starts from dead organic matter of decaying animals, which is the primary source of energy, and the plant body is consumed by microorganisms. Here the initial energy source is the waste materials and dead organic matter from the grazing food chain. Next is food web. A food web illustrates all possible transfers of energy and nutrients among the organisms in an ecosystem. Food web provides more than one alternative for food to most of the organisms in an ecosystem. There are interconnected networks of feeding relationships that take the form of food web. So basically a food web illustrates all possible transfers of energy and nutrients among the organisms in an ecosystem. Our next part is ecological pyramid. It is nothing but a steps of tropical levels expressed in a diagrammatic way. The food producer forms the base of the pyramid. The top carnivore forms the tip, and other consumer trophic levels are in between the food producer and the tips. The ecological pyramids are of three categories. They are pyramid of numbers, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy or productivity. So what is pyramid of numbers? Pyramid of numbers deals with the relationship between the numbers of primary producers and consumers of different levels. Pyramid of numbers is a graphical representation of the total number of individuals of different species belonging to each trophic level in an ecosystem. Pyramid of numbers may not always be upright and may even be completely inverted. Pyramid of numbers include the upright and the inverted, where pyramid of numbers upright includes the number of individuals is decreased from lower level to higher tropical levels, which can be seen in grassland ecosystems. With each higher tropical level, the number of individual decreases. Under the pyramid of numbers inverted, the number of individuals is increased from lower level to higher tropical level. The pyramid of numbers inverted does not take into account the fact that the size of organisms being counted in each tropical level can vary. Next topic is pyramid of biomass. Under the pyramid of biomass, individuals in each tropic level are weighted instead of being counted. Total dry weight of all organisms at each tropical level at a particular times. It is usually determined by collecting all organisms occupying each tropical level separately and measuring their dry weight. Upward pyramid of biomass includes which has a large base of primary producers. The top high tropical level has very less amount of biomass. Then inverted pyramid of biomass, which can be seen in many aquatic ecosystems. This is because the producers are tiny phytoplanktons that grow and reproduce rapidly. Here the pyramid of biomass has a small base with the consumers biomass at an instant actually exceeding the producer biomass, and the pyramid assumes inverted shape. Next is pyramid of energy. Pyramid of energy reflects the laws of thermodynamics with conversion of solar energy to chemical energy and heat energy at each tropical level, and with laws of energy being depicted at each transfer to another tropic level. Energy pyramid concepts helps to explain the phenomenon of biological magnification, the tendency for toxic substances to increase in concentration progressively at higher levels of the food chain. So, energy pyramid concepts helps to explain the phenomena of biological magnification. It reflects the laws of thermodynamics with conversion of solar energy to chemical energy and heat energy at each tropical level, with the loss of energy being depicted at each transfer to another tropical level. Next topic is pollutants and a tropical level. Pollutants, especially non-degradable ones, which moves through the various tropical levels in an ecosystem. Non-degradable pollutants mean materials which cannot be metabolized by the living organisms. Movement of these pollutants involves two main processes. The first one is the bioaccumulation and next is the biomagnification, where bioaccumulation refers to how pollutants enter a food chain. Under the bioaccumulation process, there is an increase in concentration of a pollutant from the environment to the first organism in a food chain, whereas under the biomagnification, the tendency of pollutants to concentrate as they move from one tropic level to the next. In biomagnification, there is an increase in concentration of a pollutant from one link in a food chain to another. The pollutant must be long-lived, mobile, soluble in fats, biological active under the process of biomagnification. Next topic is biotic interaction. Under the biotic interaction, organisms living in this earth are interlinked to each other in one way or other. This is the fundamental for its survival and functioning of ecosystem as a whole. What are the types of biotic interaction? The first is the mutualism, where both species benefit. Under commensalism, one species benefits whereas the other is unaffected. Under the competition, both species are harmed by the interaction. Under the predation and parasitism, one species benefits, the other is harmed. In amensalism, one species is harmed, the other is unaffected. And lastly, under the neutralism, there is no net benefit or harm to either species. Our next topic is biogeochemical cycles. As we all know that carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen and phosphorus as elements and compounds make up about 97% of the mass of our bodies and are more than 95% of the mass of all living organisms. These elements or mineral nutrients are always in circulation, moving from one living to living and then back to the non-living components of the ecosystem in a more or less circular fashion. This circular fashion is known as biogeochemical cycling, where bio is known as living and geo stands for atmosphere. Our first biogeochemical cycles includes nutrient cycling. Nutrient cycling is a concept that describes how nutrients move from the physical environment to the living organisms and subsequently recycled back to the physical environment. As we all know that nutrients are essential for life and it is the vital function of the ecology of any region. In any particular environment, to maintain its organism in a sustained manner, the nutrient cycle must be kept balanced and stable. The most important nutrient cycles are the carbon nutrient cycle and the nitrogen nutrient cycle. A perfect nutrient cycle is one in which nutrients are replaced as fast as they are utilized. Most gaseous cycles are generally considered as perfect cycles, whereas sedimentary cycles are considered relatively imperfect because some nutrients are lost from the cycle and get locked into sediments. Based on the nature of the reservoir, there are two types of cycles, namely gaseous cycle and sedimentary cycles. So the first one is the gaseous cycle, where the reservoir is the atmosphere or the hydrosphere. Most important gaseous cycles includes the water cycle, that is the hydrologic part. It is the continuous circulation of water in the Earth's atmospheric system, which is driven by solar energy. It moves from one reservoir to another by the process of evaporation, transpiration, condensation, precipitation, deposition, runoff, infiltration, and groundwater flow. Next is the carbon cycle. Carbon is a minor constituent of the atmosphere as compared to oxygen and nitrogen. Carbon is present in the atmosphere mainly in the form of carbon dioxide, that is CO2. The cycle involves a continuous exchange of carbon between the atmosphere and the organisms. Carbon moves to green plants by the process of photosynthesis and then to animals. Carbon cycle is a short-term cycle. Next is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is an essential constituent of protein and is a basic building block of all living tissue. It constitutes nearly 16% by weight of all the proteins. Nitrogen needs to be fixed, that is converted to ammonia, nitrates or nitrates before it can be taken up by plants. Nitrogen fixation on Earth is accomplished in three different ways: by the process of microorganisms, by man using industrial processes, and to a limited extent by atmospheric phenomena such as thunder and lightning. Under the nitrogen cycle, certain microorganisms are capable of fixing atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium ions, where ammonium ions can be directly taken up as a source of nitrogen by some plants or are oxidized to nitrates by two groups of specialized bacteria. The nitrates synthesized by bacteria in the soil are taken up by the plants and converted into amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. During excretion and upon the death of all organisms, nitrogen is returned to the soil in the form of ammonia. Under the nitrogen cycle, you will find some important bacterium. Aerobic Azotobacter and anaerobic Clostridium are free living nitrifying bacterium. Rhizobium is symbiotic bacteria living in non-leguminous root nodule plants. Anabaena, spirulina are blue-green algae. Nitrosomonas bacteria promote transformation of ammonia into nitrate. Nitrite is transformed into nitrate by the bacteria Nitrobacter. And lastly, Pseudomonas are special denitrifying bacteria which convert the nitrates or nitrites to elemental nitrogen. They remains in soil as well as in oceans. Next, biogeochemical cycles is the sedimentary cycle, which includes phosphorus, calcium and magnesium, which circulates by means of the sedimentary cycle. The sedimentary cycle normally does not cycle through the atmosphere but follows a basic pattern of flow through erosion, sedimentation, mountain building, volcanic activity, and biological transport through the excreta of marine birds. The first sedimentary cycle includes the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus plays a central role in aquatic ecosystems and water quality. Phosphorus occurs in large amounts as a mineral in phosphate rocks and enters a cycle from erosion and mining activities. The main storage of phosphorus is in the Earth's crust. On land, phosphorus is usually found in the form of phosphates, and by the process of weathering and erosion, phosphates enter rivers and streams that transport them to the ocean. In the ocean, once the phosphorus accumulates on continental shelves in the form of insoluble deposits. After more time, weathering will release them from rock and the cycle's geochemical phase begins again. Next sedimentary cycle includes the sulfur cycle. The sulfur reservoir is in the soil and sediments where it is locked in organic and inorganic deposits in the form of sulfates, sulfides, and organic sulfur. Sulfur is released by weathering of rocks, erosional runoff, and decomposition of organic matter and is carried to terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems in salt solution. Sulfur mostly sedimentary except two of its compounds, hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide, add a gaseous component to its normal sedimentary cycle. It enters the atmosphere from several sources like volcanic eruptions, combustion of fossil fuels from surface of ocean, and from gases released by decomposition. Atmospheric sulfur dioxide is carried back to the earth after being dissolved in rainwater as weak sulfuric acid. Sulfur bound in living organism is carried back to the soil to the bottom of ponds and lakes and seas through excretion and decomposition of dead organic material. So sulfur reservoir is in the soil and sediments where it is locked in organic and inorganic deposits in the form of sulfates, sulfides and organic sulfur. It is released by weathering of rocks, erosional runoff and decomposition of organic matter and is carried to terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems in salt solution. Our last topic of this session includes ecological succession, which is a universal process of directional change in vegetation on an ecological time scale. It is a progressive series of changes which leads to the establishment of a relatively stable climax community. Succession process continues from one community replacing another community until a stable mature community develops. The first plant to colonize an area is called the pioneer community, and the final stage of succession is called the climax community. Succession would occur faster in area existing in the middle of the large continent. Next is the primary succession. Primary succession were a few hardy pioneer species that are often microbes, lichens and mosses. Pioneer species disappear as the habitat conditions change and invasion of new species progresses, leading to the replacement of the preceding community. Under this secondary succession, the plant recognizes an area in which the climax community has been disturbed. The sequential development of biotic communities after the complete or partial destruction of the existing community starts on a well-developed soil which has already formed at the site. Autogenic succession is brought about by living inhabitants of that community itself, whereas allogenic succession brought about by outside forces. Under the autotrophic succession, in which initially the green plants are much greater in quantity, whereas heterotrophic succession, the heterotrophs are greater. Thanks for watching.